Do you already own a home, or are you still renting, unsure how long you can actually keep it? For millions of people living on a mostly fixed monthly income, the real fear isn't size or style, it's losing control. Housing costs keep rising, while income often doesn't. Add children, legal responsibilities, and bills that can't be delayed, and suddenly the question isn't how nice a house is, but whether it can stay affordable for the next 10 or 20 years. This is why the idea of a Tesla tiny house matters, not as a lifestyle trend, but as a different approach to housing risk and long-term stability. In this video, we'll break down how Tesla designs a home for people who need certainty, not excess. So subscribe to James Gear, turn on notifications, and let's explore it together. 1. What actually makes a Tesla tiny house viable to live in long-term? A Tesla tiny house becomes viable in the long term because the U.S. housing system in 2025 is no longer just expensive. At the extreme end, the system is already failing for a growing number of people. Homelessness reached an all-time high in 2024, with more than 771,000 people unhoused, up 18% in a single year and roughly one-third higher than 2020. Half of U.S. renters now spend more than 30% of their income on housing, and over 12 million are severely cost-burdened, meaning they spend more than 50%. For someone living on a mostly fixed income, spending half of it on housing doesn't just mean financial stress. It means choosing between rent and medication, between keeping the lights on and keeping money for emergencies. At that point, housing is no longer about comfort. It becomes about control. In 2025, the numbers show that most cannot. Tight credit, down payment hurdles, and record-high ownership costs have made first-time buying extremely difficult. Only about 6 million of the nation's 46 million renters earn enough to afford the median-priced home. So households remain in the rental market. But the rental market is not offering relief either. Even as rent increases moderate, average monthly rents for professionally managed units still came in at $1,830 in Q1 2025, which is 32% higher than the same quarter of 2019. When you connect these pieces, the long-term need becomes clear. A large share of renters are financially stretched, buying is blocked for most, and renting stays expensive. In that environment, a tiny house becomes viable long-term because it creates a third path, a lower threshold to stable shelter, lower ongoing exposure to rent inflation, and a more predictable cost structure than a traditional mortgage route that most people cannot enter anyway. 2. Why a tiny house is affordable to live in every day, not just cheap to buy. The core difference of the Tesla tiny house lies in how its entire living system is designed around minimizing daily operating costs. First is electricity, the largest monthly expense in most households. The average residential electricity price in the United States currently ranges from about 0.16 to 0.18 US dollars per kilowatt hour. An average U.S. household consumes around 877 kilowatt hours per month, resulting in an electricity bill of roughly 140 to 160 US dollars, even without heavy use of high-power appliances. In contrast, actual electricity consumption in a tiny house is much lower due to its small footprint and limited number of appliances. With basic needs such as a refrigerator, LED lighting, a water pump, a laptop, a modem, and a few small household devices, total consumption typically ranges from 5 to 8 kilowatt hours per day, or about 150 to 240 kilowatt hours per month. This means a tiny house uses only about 1/4 of the electricity of a traditional home. This difference becomes even more pronounced when considering the solar roof and Powerwall system. With a roof area of approximately 25 to 35 square meters, the solar roof can achieve an installed capacity of about 4.5 to over 5 kilowatts. This means a tiny house rooftop system can produce approximately 18 to 25 kilowatt hours per day. When compared directly, the solar output is several times higher than the actual daily demand. Excess electricity is stored in the Powerwall, which has a capacity of 13.5 kilowatt hours and a continuous output of 5 kilowatts. As a result, under normal operating conditions, a tiny house requires little to no daily grid electricity, and actual electricity costs typically fall between 0 and 30 US dollars per month. Next is water. An average household uses about 300 gallons of water per day. In contrast, one or two people living in a tiny house usually need only about 50 to 90 gallons per day due to the smaller space, fewer fixtures, and built-in water-saving devices. This difference comes from the use of low-flow showers, water-efficient toilets, fewer water outlets, and reduced leakage. In addition, in jurisdictions where regulations allow, tiny houses can integrate rainwater collection and basic filtration systems to further reduce reliance on public water supplies. The average water bill for a U.S. household is currently around 70 to 100 U.S. dollars per month, while the lower usage of a tiny house can reduce this cost to approximately 30 to 50 U.S. dollars per month. Internet costs are less affected by home size. The cost of basic cable or fiber internet in the U.S. in 2025 typically ranges from 40 to 70 U.S. dollars per month, while mobile 4G or 5G hotspot plans usually cost between 30 and 60 U.S. dollars per month. When all basic utilities are combined, the difference becomes clear. A household in a traditional home typically spends about 270 to 330 U.S. dollars per month on electricity, water, and internet. With a Tesla tiny house, this figure is usually around 110 to 140 U.S. dollars. This is not a minor saving, but a structural shift in cost. For example, a retiree receiving a pension of about 2,000 U.S. dollars per month. It becomes apparent when rising utility bills force them to choose between keeping their homes comfortable and paying for medication, insurance, or routine health checkups. In a traditional home, utility costs alone can consume around 15% of monthly income. In a tiny house, this share drops to roughly 6%. The remaining income is not burned on bills, but can instead be allocated to healthcare, food, transportation, and savings. 3. Can a Tesla tiny house really stay reliable for decades? In traditional housing, what forces homeowners to deal with ongoing minor repairs over time is usually not structural failure, but small weaknesses in the building envelope, joints, wall penetrations, roof-to-wall intersections, and sealant lines that require caulking. Sealing materials such as caulk and sealant have a finite service life. Low-performance caulks typically have a service life of around 3 to 5 years before they require reapplication. For someone living on a fixed income, this cycle rarely feels minor. Every resealing job means calling a contractor, waiting for availability, paying labor costs, and dealing with disruption. As people get older, the burden is not just the money, but the constant need to manage problems that return again and again. If Tesla Tiny House applies a philosophy similar to Tesla's gigacasting approach in automotive manufacturing, meaning larger and more integrated envelope and structural modules, the number of mechanical joints and sealant lines would be significantly reduced. Tesla previously described moving from around 70 underbody components to a single cast piece in the Model Y, with the primary goal of eliminating numerous assembly steps and connection points. When this principle is applied to housing, the benefit is not only increased structural rigidity, but also fewer sealant lines, fewer locations that require waterproofing inspection, and therefore a reduced need for recurring minor repairs on the typical 3 to 5 year cycle seen in joint-heavy buildings. The roof is also where much of the cost and trouble emerges as a house begins to age. Roof-related damage can account for 70 to 90% of total insured losses in residential disaster events, because once the roof fails, water and wind cause cascading damage. As a result, a roof designed to minimize weak points at joints and reduce seasonally vulnerable components can significantly lower unexpected repair costs, shifting maintenance from reactive fixes to periodic inspections. From the perspective of how often repairs are needed and whether professional labor must be called in, a tiny house with a minimized joint design follows a very different maintenance model from a traditional home. Instead of dealing with small issues every year, most required work consists of infrequent, long-cycle inspections focused on a limited number of areas such as roof-to-wall intersections, technical penetrations, and key sealant lines. When these points are fewer by design, homeowners do not have to live in a constant state of readiness to call a contractor. With a Tesla tiny house, the real question is not size or price, but control over monthly costs, over repairs, and over where you live as housing becomes more unpredictable. So would you rather own a smaller home you can actually keep, or a bigger one you might struggle to hold on to in 10 years? Drop your answer in the comments and let's break it down together.